Imagine this. You're sitting alone after a long day. Someone said something that rubbed you the wrong way, nothing major. But later, you're snapping at your partner, avoiding calls, and drowning in distractions. You don't know why you're so irritated. You just are. Sound familiar? Now, what if I told you that this isn't random? That behind these reactions is a part of you you've quietly exiled. Welcome to the shadow. See, most people think shadow work is something dark, mystical, maybe even dangerous. Something only for the broken or the spiritual fringe. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Shadow work isn't about diving into darkness. It's about reclaiming what you've hidden from yourself, not because it was evil, but because it was once unsafe. Take a man taught from childhood that anger is shameful. He learns to suppress it, believing that silence is strength, but that anger doesn't disappear. It mutates into passive aggression, into guilt, into subtle cruelty. He hurts others without knowing why, because the part of him that once needed protection has now become his blind spot. Shadow isn't the enemy. It's just the name for the parts of you you weren't allowed to love. And if you're willing to meet those parts, not fix them, not fear them, just see them, something changes. You stop reacting. You start remembering who you really are. So, what have you hidden from yourself? And what is it costing you to keep it buried? The shadow isn't just the bad stuff you've buried. It's what's been unloved, unwanted, and unintegrated. To really understand the shadow, we need to understand what Carl Jung saw as the architecture of the psyche. He didn't describe the mind in simple terms, he painted it as a complex inner landscape, filled with opposing forces all pulling toward one goal, wholeness. Let's start with the persona. Jung defined the persona as the mask we wear, the image we carefully craft for the world. It's how we want to be seen, kind, smart, likable, successful. And that mask isn't inherently fake. In fact, it helps us survive and belong. But the problem arises when we start believing that the mask is who we are. The more we cling to our persona, the more we reject everything that doesn't fit it. That's where the shadow begins to form. The shadow is everything we've disowned, consciously or unconsciously. Every emotion, trait, or impulse that once threatened our acceptance by parents, teachers, society gets pushed underground. Anger, assertiveness, neediness, lust, but not just so-called negative traits. Jung warned us that the shadow also contains our gold, our suppressed confidence, our buried ambition, our silent strength. He once said, "The shadow is 90% pure gold." Why? Because the parts we reject are often the ones most essential to our personal power. Between the persona and the shadow stands the ego, our conscious mind, our sense of I. This is where decisions are made. But the ego isn't always fair. It leans toward what feels familiar or socially acceptable. It filters out what doesn't match its worldview. Some egos prefer logic over feeling, introversion over expression, and in doing so, push away the rest of us that doesn't fit. Jung believed the goal of psychological and spiritual growth is not to become perfect, but to become whole. That's where the self comes in. The self is not the same as the ego. It's the full spectrum of who you are, both the light and the dark, the conscious and the unconscious. Jung called the journey toward this integrated self-individuation a lifelong path of becoming your truest, most complete being. It's not about getting rid of the shadow. It's about forming a relationship with it. Because as long as we deny it, it drives us from the back seat. But once we bring it into awareness, we reclaim the steering wheel. So the question becomes, are you living as a mask? Or are you ready to meet the part of you that's been waiting all along? In the next section, we will explore the mechanism behind the formation of the shadow. The shadow isn't something you're born with. It's something you inherit, absorb, and construct layer by layer through experience, silence, and survival. Carl Jung saw the formation of the shadow as a necessary psychological event. To function in society, especially as children, we adapt. We learn quickly that certain emotions, instincts, or traits are bad, too much, or unlovable. So we do what every child must, we bury them. But they don't vanish. They become what Jung called the splintered unconscious. What gets split off doesn't die, it becomes the shadow. This isn't just repression. It's karma. In shadow work, karma isn't about divine punishment. It's about psychological momentum, the emotional echoes and unconscious loops that shape our lives long after the original moment of rejection. These karmic layers create powerful undercurrents in our inner world. Personal karma is the most intimate. It's the habits, self-destructive cycles, and limiting beliefs we repeat without realizing we're acting out our own wounds. The person who sabotages every relationship just as it gets close. That's personal karma playing out from a buried fear of abandonment. Interpersonal karma is about relational patterns, especially the ones that hurt. You might keep attracting unavailable partners, or become the rescuer in every dynamic. Jung believed these were projections of unnamed parts of the psyche, shaped by childhood attachment styles and unconscious needs. Ancestral karma speaks to the pain we didn't earn, but still carry. Jung's concept of the collective unconscious includes the trauma and unspoken wounds passed down from generation to generation. You may be carrying the silence of your mother, the suppressed rage of your grandfather, the shame no one dared to name. Cultural karma forms when society itself reinforces the need to hide parts of ourselves. Men are taught not to cry. Women are shamed for ambition. Desire is taboo. Vulnerability is weakness. And so, entire identities are edited to fit an image. The shadow swirls beneath the pressure of cultural ideals. Archetypal karma goes even deeper. Jung identified universal psychic images: the rebel, the orphan, the mother, the lover, the hero that live within the collective unconscious. These archetypes speak through our dreams, fantasies, and emotional instincts. When we suppress their energy, they don't vanish. They twist into distorted behaviors, unmet needs, or addictive patterns. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but to do that, we must confront the split we made in order to be loved. We must ask ourselves, what part of me was I forced to exile to belong?" That is the beginning of integration, not a return to innocence, but a return to wholeness. In the next section, we will explore the core of shadow work. Shadow work, at its core, is not about fixing what's broken. It's about discovering what's being buried. Carl Jung defined the shadow as the unknown dark side of the personality, but not dark in the moral sense. Dark only because it's hidden, because it's been pushed out of the light of awareness. And in Jung's view, what's unconscious doesn't disappear. It waits, it acts, it influences everything from the background. That's why shadow work begins not with some mystical process, but with observation. Close, honest observation of your strongest emotional reactions. Ever overreacted to something small? Felt a surge of envy or rage you couldn't explain? Judged someone instantly and harshly, only to feel confused later about why it hit so deep? These are calls from the shadow. Jung taught that what we reject in ourselves, we project onto others. He said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Shadow behavior shows up in many subtle forms. Self-sabotage when you're close to success. Passive-aggressive outbursts you didn't mean. Sudden emotional floods: anger, shame, fear that seem disproportionate. Harsh judgment toward others for traits you were once shamed for. But here's the deeper truth. The shadow is not only made of darkness, it holds your dormant power. Hidden within it are the parts of you that were once punished, dismissed, or misunderstood but are vital to your wholeness. Your leadership, your passion, your creativity, your assertiveness, your confidence. These are psychological treasures you disown not because they were bad, but because they were unwelcome in the environments you grew up in. Jung compared the shadow to an underground cave filled with gold. But that gold is guarded by fear, by shame, by resistance. It is not easily accessed. To enter that cave, we must confront discomfort, not to be consumed by it, but to bring it into the light of consciousness. And this is where transformation begins, not by moralizing our impulses, but by learning from them. When you explore the part of yourself that you once feared, you don't just heal the past, you unlock your future, because beneath the anger might be clarity. Beneath the shame, sensitivity. Beneath the fear, raw strength. The question is, can you sit with what you've tried to outrun? That moment of sitting, that quiet willingness to feel instead of flees, the true beginning of shadow work. Not a destination, but a descent, a return. A reclaiming of the self you've left behind. In the next section, we'll explore the core techniques of shadow work. To bring the shadow into the light, awareness alone is not enough. Carl Jung didn't just offer a theory, he offered a practice. He knew that integration requires more than intellectual understanding. It requires emotional courage, creative openness, and a willingness to enter conversation with the unknown. One of Jung's most powerful tools was active imagination. It's not daydreaming. It's a conscious dialogue with the images, symbols, and figures that arise from the unconscious. You begin by relaxing the rational mind and letting an image emerge, a place, a person, a dream fragment. Then you interact with it. You ask it questions. You listen. You let it speak. Through this symbolic engagement, the unconscious is given voice, and the shadow begins to unfold into meaning. Another path inward is creative expression, art, writing, dance, music. Jung believed the psyche speaks in symbols, and that creating without censorship allows the unconscious to speak through us. A simple drawing, a stream of consciousness journal entry, a melody hummed in solitude, these are not frivolous acts. They are sacred acts of psychological retrieval. Jung also emphasized cultivating what he called the silent witness, a non-judgmental presence within you that simply observes. Not to analyze, not to fix, but to become aware. You notice the anger without lashing out. You feel the sadness without pushing it away. This inner witness is your anchor in the sea of emotional tides. It helps you recognize that you are not your thoughts, not even your feelings. You are the one who sees. And perhaps most important of all, focus on the feeling. Jung urged us not to bypass discomfort with positive thinking or moral labels. When you feel envy, let it rise. When fear stirs, let it move through you. What you resist persists, he warned. The goal is not to suppress the shadow, but to stay present with it long enough to understand what it's really asking for. These techniques are not about dissecting yourself like a machine. They are about relationship, about listening to the parts of you that were never heard. And in doing so, they blend analysis with meditation, reflection with embodiment. Shadow work, then, becomes not just psychology, but a form of soul practice. A path of healing not through control, but through communion. Ultimately, the shadow doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. It continues to move beneath the surface, shaping your thoughts, guiding your reactions, repeating patterns you can't explain. Every act of self-sabotage, every relationship that ends the same way, every time you ask yourself, why am I like this? These are the fingerprints of the unconscious. Carl Jung once wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Shadow work is the act of breaking that trance. It's not about banishing your darkness, but building a relationship with it, so that it no longer controls you from behind the curtain. This isn't about quick fixes or positive thinking. It's about energetic responsibility. Wherever you focus your awareness, you place your power. And your energy is not passive, it's the architect of your reality. If your shadow is where all your unacknowledged energy is stored, then turning toward it is not dangerous, it's liberating. As Carl Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Healing doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with honesty, with the radical act of turning inward and saying, this, too, is part of me. The pain you've hidden, the emotions you've judged, The instincts you've tried to silence, they are not flaws. They are fragments of your forgotten self, asking to be seen. The goal is not to become perfect. The goal is to become whole. Wholeness is what happens when you stop waging war with yourself. When you no longer try to amputate your anger, your desire, your ambition, your vulnerability, but instead, learn how to hold them wisely. Shadow work is not about suppression. It's about integration. When you integrate the shadow, it no longer operates as a hidden force of chaos. It becomes a wellspring of creative power, a source of emotional clarity, a mirror reflecting your authentic self. The part of you you've been most afraid to become, the one you've labeled too much, too intense, too sensitive, too ambitious, might just be the most powerful version of you. Jung called this process individuation, not the path of becoming someone else, but of becoming fully yourself. So if your life feels stuck, hollow, or fragmented, it's not because you're broken. It's because parts of you have been exiled, and now they're asking to come home. Shadow work is not a detour from your path, it is the path. Not to perfection, but to presence, not to control, but to consciousness. And the invitation is this: will you keep running from what's already inside you, or will you finally turn and meet it? Thank you for being here.